Hello, welcome to Season 9 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. The theme of this season is 100 Years of Horror. We're going to watch two horror movies from every decade, from 1920 to 2020, in chronological order. We want to see where horror came from, how it's changed, and maybe even make some predictions about where it's going. If you want to see the full list of movies we'll be reviewing this season and follow along, then check out our website at thehorrific.com. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. And we're back. Another episode in Season 9, where we're doing 100 Years of Horror, and today is our second installment of the 1920s, second of two. And we did the movie Nosferatu, which by all accounts should not even exist in the world today, but somehow it survived.
Yeah. It's a film that when talking about doing the 100 Years of Horror, we have to add this. It was almost like it needs to be done.
Yeah. This one's on pretty much every list ever of essential historic horror movies.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know a whole lot about it other than just that the people that made it had been sued by Bram Stoker's estate and a bunch of the copies had been destroyed, which I'm sure you'll get into more detail on that in your fun facts, maybe. But yeah, I was excited to watch this one just because it had been on my radar for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I've tried to watch it in the past before because I get on my weird kicks where it's like I want to know where it started. Hence this season. But, I couldn't ever finish it before ADD-wise, but I'm definitely happy that we did it. It was exciting to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have all kinds of questions for you about... Did you watch this one on Amazon Prime as well?
I did.
Okay, cool. There's some weird things in that I want to ask you about, but I realized as I was getting ready for this episode that you may not have seen the same one.
Yeah.
And so you may not have had the same experiences.
There was also a couple different versions on Prime too, I noticed.
Yes, yeah. And so I am assuming we watched the same one, but we will find out.
Yeah.
I will introduce it, then you can do your fun facts, and then we will get into the blood-sucking details.
I like that.
In 1922, Film Arts Guild unleashed Nosferatu on the world. This silent, expressionist German horror film is similar to, but definitely not a complete ripoff of, Bram Stoker's Dracula. It does, however, tell almost the exact story to Bram Stoker's Dracula, and is also considered to be an extremely influential film in both the horror genre and cinema at large. Nosferatu is currently available to be streamed for free for Prime members on Amazon Prime Video.
It's beautiful. It's poetry every time you do that.
I rehearse.
Do you?
No, I just write it all out beforehand.
So, to start off the notes, like you were talking about, this brazenly ripped off the novel. More so than even Bela Lugosi's Dracula.
Right. Which came out much later and was actually sanctioned.
Yeah, blew my mind. So, in 1921, German artist and architect Albin Garou joined forces with Enrico Deckman to establish a new movie company called Piranha Films. That's how I pronounce it. A World War I veteran with a keen interest in the occult. Boring stuff about military services. Anyway, basically what they thought they could do with this film, Garou believed that he could avoid lawsuit by tweaking Dracula's plot in a few key places. In this film, the setting was changed from Victorian London to 17th century Germany. Completely omitted were the book's original ending, the character of Van Helsing, the vampire hunter. Moreover, the most key players were remained, though. Count Dracula became Count Orlok. The full title, Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, was inspired by the term that appears twice in the movie's source material. Stoker mistakenly thought Nosferatu meant vampire in Romanian.
Idiot.
I know. So, straight up stole it. I wondered if it was like one of those things where it was like they didn't know. Like what kind of copyright rules did you have in the 20s? I wasn't about to find out, but it's just whatever.
Yeah, and at the same time too, this is like a startup who just wants to make a cool movie. It's not a guy thinking, I'm going to start this conglomeration. They can travel and take over the world and be this movie powerhouse by stealing people's ideas for famous novels. I mean, come on.
Imagine being that guy though. Like, he just thinks that he's just going to get a couple $200, which in 1922 to today is about $3.1 billion, and
in Ethereum.
Yeah, and then you make some money, but then come to find out, it's like, oh, you made one of like the most prolific like horror movies, and or like well-known horror movies, and you stole it. So good on you, man.
Yep.
So the guy who plays the vampire, Max Schreck's life, or Max, who played the vampire, it's kind of funny because his last name, which I'm going to say is Schreck's. Didn't look it up, don't care. It actually is a German word for the word terror. Did you know that?
I did not.
Yeah, so his last name is actually Terror, which I think is pretty interesting.
What a serendipitous coincidence.
It is, yes. It was very interesting. Which I thought he did very well at that, but that's once we get into the actual movie. Some of the special effects that were done in this movie, which I thought was pretty interesting, was they used stop motion photography. For example, when Orlok's coffin closes by itself after the lid levitates off the ground, basically an early form stop motion animation was made that possible by rapidly showing the sequence of still images in which the lid moves closer and closer to the final resting spot. I literally just explained stop motion to you guys. They were able to trick the viewer into thinking that the inanimate object was flying around under its own power. The same technique was also employed during the scene in which Orlok uses his magic to open the hatch of the ship. Which I think is just like, we found another movie that first off inspired Tim Burton, but second off, that was like an early on technique that, might not still be done today, but very, has its own genre. Like, you get on Reddit and you search stop motion, you see some pretty cool, like, homemade stop motion videos and stuff. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, and it was probably a much more practical way to do some of those more ambitious things at the time than trying to figure out a way to, like, film it live,
Yeah, for sure. So in Nosferatu, the idea that the vampire burns up when exposed to direct sunlight is basically traced to this movie. So in Dracula, the villain casually walks around outside in broad daylight. According to the novel, solar rays can slightly weaken the vampire, but Stoker never implies that it would kill one. Yet for the sake of more visually compelling climax, because it is a silent film, Grue and the scene writer, Henrik Galeen, decided to make the sun's light utterly fatal to poor Count Orlok, who disappears in a puff of smoke when he's lured to a well-lit room. Spoilers, I apologize. But they started that, and it was based off of how they had to film it. They had to make it happen.
Sure.
And it just blows my mind, because that's like you don't even think about, like, where would that start. I would have just assumed it was in the book, which I wouldn't have read because I'm not a nerd, and it's not. It was from a silent film. Yeah. So you don't have to read books, you just got to watch films.
Naturally.
Yeah. So, what can you do? So Stoker's wife, she did sue the studio. If she had got her way, it would have, been completely destroyed. Shortly after Nosferatu premiered in Berlin, Florence Stoker, Bram's widow, received an anonymous package containing one of its promotional posters displayed upon a placard with the inflammatory lines freely adapted from Bram Stoker's Dracula. I would have been pissed, and she was too. She took legal action on it. Upon receiving the poster, she joined British Incorporated Society of Authors, which hired a German lawyer to go after Piranha Films. At first, the plan was to sue the company for copyright infringement. However, a string of terrible business decisions, not the least of which was Nosferatu's recklessly expensive marketing campaign, had already bankrupted the studio. So when it became clear that Stoker would never make a dime off Nosferatu, she did everything in her power to have all the copies of the film destroyed. In 1925, a German court sided with her and ordered that every copy within the nation be burned. Yet, just like Count Dracula, Nosferatu proved very difficult to kill. They should just put it in direct sunlight, dummies. Over the next few years, surviving copies made their way to the US, UK, thus the undead picture haunted Florence Stoker until the end of her days. Before she died in 1937, a handful of screenings took place, usually in the United States, the country of freedom. Stoker relentlessly tracked down wayward copies of the movie and incinerated those that she got her hands on. But despite her best efforts, Nosferatu lived on in form of pirated bootlegs.
All right then.
I'm just saying.
It's come a long way. Like, I feel like this movie had to work hard to survive.
It did.
And it's kind of cool that it's still available.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, granted, like, as an artist, I could see the frustration of like, hey, that's my shit. Like,
yeah.
Anyway,
but you just got to license it. You just got to get your cut. That's all that matters.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. So this one to me was interesting, kind of doing our week over week comparison, because it was just so much more realistic than the Cabinet of Dr. 100%. Caligari. And I know that was Caligari, that was like a deliberate choice to make it the more kind of weird manufactured background. But it was just kind of striking to me after watching that to watch this one that was filmed in actual buildings or on streets and landscapes with it felt a lot less like a play because of that. Like, it didn't feel like they were just on a stage set the whole time.
Yeah.
But the acting was still very exaggerated and theater-like.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. So when I looked it up on Amazon Prime, it actually said the date was 1929, and I was like getting confused because there's like different dates, like for the different versions of this film. Well, I get why now, because it's all pirated and
right.
But once you actually look it up, so initially when I watched this and I saw 1929 and I knew that it was early 20s for Dr. Caligari, it was like, oh, okay, well, it made a huge difference, almost decade of film techniques and stuff. And then it was like, oh no, this is like right, like this is at the same time basically that was going on, film wise. It's like, it was just two different styles. So it made me appreciate the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari a little bit more. But then it made me really appreciate this because it was like some of the scenes, like the outside shots and stuff, I was like, that looks really good.
Yeah.
Now, they also did the same techniques from Dr. Caligari with, like, there were a couple scenes that was, like, obvious painted background. It looks like you're looking out the window at a mountain, but you're not.
Yeah, right.
But,
or buildings that aren't straight.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, hey, that's, it is what it is. They did with what they got. Or they, dealt with the hands they were given. And made a film out of it. That lasted 100 freaking years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, so something I'm curious about is in your version, did the name Orlok ever come up?
Mine said Count Dracula.
Mine did too.
Yeah.
So and mine had Dr. Van Helsing was in it.
Oh.
Did yours have that? It's like the professor that was teaching about the plants?
If it did, I missed it.
Okay, so there are some things that I had also read, like you said in your facts, about the changes between this movie and the original source material that were back. And so I was trying to figure out at what point, because you can change, obviously, fairly easily, like those little text placards in between the shots.
Yeah.
And I'm curious at what point that happened. Like, at some point, was there were people just like, it might as well be Dracula. It'll get more traction in my local theater if people connect it to that, so they just like overwrote some of it or something, or or is that a thing that where Amazon now, as part of the licensing and settling with Bram Stoker's estate, are splitting profits and putting in actual character names or what? I don't know what the story behind it is, but it was just really interesting to me because the version of this movie that I watched was just laughably ripping off the novel. And so then hearing that they thought they could get away with it by making some minor changes, I was like, really? But when I went back and read more about it, I was like, okay, there are definitely some deliberate changes that were made in the original movie that were not present in the one that I watched. And so it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. But then another thing I thought that was really interesting, both with Dr. Caligari and this movie, or the music that was associated. Because at the time of silent films, I mean, they were called silent films because they were actually silent. And they would have like a live organist or musicians in the theater playing music to accompany it. And so by virtue of having the music bundled with the film, both last week and this week, it's almost like not a true representation of what watching it at the time would have been like, because the originals of these movies were not bundled with that music. It was kind of up to the interpretation of like the local theater musician. And so that one of my biggest complaints with this movie was I thought that the music was very perfect through about the first half of it.
Yes.
And then from about the time the boat landed on, it was just wildly not fitting any of what the visuals of the movie were doing. Did you have the same experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, mine wasn't when the boat landed. It was when it was on the boat. Like there was almost like this dream sound that was made like a...
Yes.
It was like, wait, that's... Oh, wait, it was almost like they went from like a minor key to a major, like where, minors are always sad, or different, sad sound. It was like, wait, what the heck just happened? Like he's on the, come on, like they just died. But I did.
And that like super intense ending sequence where, you don't know if he's going to kill Nina or if she's going to defeat him or what's going to happen. And it was just this sort of like super mellow pastoral kind of like romantic comedy type background music, and I was like, who thought that was a good idea?
Right. And
so anyway, all that to say, I want to like remove my assessment of the movie from that, because I don't really consider that to be part of how the movie was made. I think that was most definitely a thing that got added after the fact, and it's sad to me because I feel like it really hurts it.
Yeah, one of the facts that I actually read about it, and I skipped over it, I wish I hadn't now, but was so it was relatively common with silent films, but when Nosferatu premiered in Berlin, it was accompanied by a live orchestra score that was done by a guy named Hans Erdmann. No recordings of this original soundtrack are known to exist, although a few restorations have been made over the years. Nosferatu has also received several alternative scores spanning a wide array of genres. Various home video editions now include jazz, electronics, and background music, and classical background music. So it's, what we got, I think, is kind of what we got, and I bet if we watched a different version, we probably would have a different feeling about it. But, I think it's kind of interesting. Like, part of me is like, let's keep the original what it is, and that's what it was made. However, some of the things they did over time, like you talked about with the text change that we saw, and with the soundtrack, it's like, is that what help make this a lasting film? Mm-hmm. Would it have lasted longer if there wasn't that association with Count Dracula and Van Helsing and all that? Yeah. I think it probably would have, but I don't think it hurt in this situation.
Yeah, like the music did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. And
but if you're relying on music so much because that's what you're listening to the whole thing, it needs to be on point. And this unfortunately missed the mark a few times. Well, from the boat scene on, basically for me, boat scene on.
Yeah, that was where the big kind of transition was. But anyway, so rewind back and take the music out of it, and then we can kind of go into. This movie did a lot of really interesting things. So, and not all of them were horror related, but like I noted there was like the dramatic irony in the beginning where you know that Dracula, if you watched our version, or the Orlok, if you watched a different version,
original,
wants to buy a house, and the guy is talking about how he's loose with his money, so this is a good opportunity for Harker because he's young, so what's the matter if it costs a little pain or blood? And you in the audience know exactly what's being talked about, that this is like a joke about vampires, because you as an audience member know that the guy trying to buy the house is a vampire, but the character on the stage doesn't, and so he's just like, yeah, okay, metaphorical talk, that makes sense. And then I noticed they also, as he's making his way out to Dracula's castle, they're using a lot of the townspeople's reactions to him saying that's where he's going as a way to like build up that suspense without having to actually show anything scary. So there's a lot of like foreshadowing in that regard. And I think that is such a common thing that we've seen in horror movies, basically in all of the seasons that we've done across most time, is you have people who are bringing up that sort of fear of the place that the other person's going, or the person that they're going to see, or just sort of like building up that reputation around it before they even show anything to like prime the pump and set the mood, so that when you do encounter the character or the situation or whatever, you're already like ready to be scared, you know? And so seeing that here, and that was like a deliberate thing they did over a fair amount of time in the movie, was like, all right, well, that's where that came from.
Yeah. I think it's something too that I feel like some thought was put into it, where it was like, how do we get the suspicion or the anxiety of what's to come without showing him right away? And it was exactly what you explained. Like that's how you do it. And that's how it's done, nowadays. Like,
but yeah, and they definitely like leaned into that and did it pretty well. But they also did other stuff too that was pretty good. Like, they had the Dracula's shadow creeping up on Harker while he's asleep, which we know also happened in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, but has also happened in basically every horror movie since.
Yeah.
And then you had mentioned the stop motion on like the self-closing doors, or the doors opening and stuff, but all of those like doors that close themselves or things that moved without a person touching them. It was kind of like minor in this, but that's definitely been copied in every haunting or ghost movie since. And so there were just a lot of things happening here. And there were even sometimes in this one where I felt like it almost felt corny, just because the things you were seeing have been done so much and repeated so many times that it's just boring in other horror movies that have come out since this.
Yeah. I think when you watch this and you see some of like the overreacting, or like even some of the dialogue, I mean, I know you're reading it, like it was pretty rough at times, where it's just like, like when she gets the flowers at the beginning, and like the way she kind of holds them, and it's just like coveting them. It's like that's not natural. Like if I was the director of the film, I'd be like, a natural response to getting flowers, I think, is like smelling them, So it's like, just smell them. But there's some things like that, but there wasn't enough that like ruined it. Like you knew what you're getting yourself into. It's just, for me, it was kind of interesting to see those overreactions and all that play out. It's like, oh, that's pretty sweet that this movie could survive with some of that not so great acting taking place, but I loved it. Like I legit enjoyed the film, so it worked. I'll definitely watch it again. But one of the scenes I think that really stuck out to me was, we talked about the stop motion of like the coffin and and the other door. But when he stands straight up from the coffin, that for me was like, that's like that. I know you have the iconic shadow scene and stuff, but that was like what hit home, and like the scary part, just imagining watching that happen, like in real life, and a guy just, the vampire just kind of sits up and looks like that, freaking long fingers and the, big nose. Just, oh man, it, kind of legit gave you a little bit of creeps.
Man, the part that got me was when Harker is first going to the castle, and then you see the Dracula Orlok character standing there, and he's wearing like, the black coat, and his features are sort of exaggerated, and he's just kind of standing there in the midst of that rundown, abandoned looking castle. And it's just the shot of him sort of just like standing there looking, just felt so iconic, and we talked last time about how with a lot of the, black and white silent movies where it's kind of more grainy, and they just were really good at creating these memorable images of like horror villains. And, would it have even worked in like an HD modern movie? Probably not. But something about that, just this sort of creepy, human-like, but not quite human, sort of dark, evil-looking character in that grainy black and white. There's just something that hits about that.
Yep.
And as soon as I saw that image, I was like, yes, this is the thing that lasts about this movie. This is why this movie has stood the test of time, is that image that they created of that character is something that just like sticks with you. And I really appreciate that piece of like the design or the artistry or costuming or wwhatever of this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also kind of crazy to think about like the way that the movie turned out. Which one of the things I was reading was that that Count Orlok Dracula doesn't appear until 21 minutes into the film, and I think the film was only like an hour and 19 or 20 minutes long. So basically that 20 minutes is cut out, and just kind of crazy to think about like the build up and the anticipation is, and they didn't do it for just a few minutes. Like they made you last a good section of the film, and it worked.
Like we talked about before, they invested that time in like building it up to going to it, so that you were kind of ready to see him, but also knew that he was dangerous and evil and everything else, which made it that much more impactful when they did finally show him.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there was a lot of stuff that I liked. I enjoyed the imagery of it. Obviously, I thought a lot of the story and stuff was interesting. I did not. Basically, from the time they got on the boat, it felt like it became much more like narrative driven, and a lot less stuff actually happening on the screen that was interesting until the very end. So I'm not gonna lie, it kind of had like a big lull for me in maybe like from 70% in to 90% in. But then it kind of picked back up a little more at the end. But we had another one of our just kind of abrupt endings.
We did. I loved it.
It's like Nina goes to confront the vampire. It works. Everyone is okay. The end.
Yeah.
And I will say that, judging the two movies from the 1920s against each other, I like Caligari's ending better. It's just like, no, the guy you were kind of cheering for the whole time is just crazy. The end.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as far as, comparing the two, I felt like this one had like, even though it was 100 years old, it felt more crisp in some of the scenes, whereas Dr. Kill was kind of hard and fuzzy. Like you mentioned, you couldn't read the note. Like I couldn't read that either. But like you said, it was like once, like the last bit of the movie was just, it almost seemed rushed in a way, where it was like,
I agree.
she realizes what she has to do. She goes, looks out the window, she faints. I mean, it's just like bam, bam, bam. And it's like, wait, what? Like what just happened? And then you don't get anything. It's just done. And you're like, okay, like here we go. Like,
I immediately pulled up the Wikipedia page and read the ending of the plot synopsis, because I was just like, wait, did I miss something?
Yeah.
It's like we talk about, is you're taking notes while you're watching these movies, especially with a silent one, where so much of it is reliant on you watching and catching like dialogue or these like quick kind of transition type scenes. It's really easy to miss something. And I was like, wait, what did I miss? And I was like, oh, nothing. It just really does end that way. So
Yeah. Yep. So this obviously, the way it ties into horror is because it's one of the first vampire films.
Yeah.
But it's not the
like
first,
said,
but it's one of the first.
Yeah, and this one definitely established a lot of the sort of vampire tropes, a lot of the rules about interacting with vampires, I guess, and adding like a visual element to that, I think played a really big influence in how they would be depicted in movies moving forward.
Well, it's crazy to think about, too, is the first two movies that we picked, which were random, just based off of the names and the history of them, are both German films, too. Like, that's pretty crazy to think about. It seems like we're almost, the United States was almost behind in the times as far as that comes along.
Well, yeah, that, and then also, I feel like you were probably just trying to give them as much exposure as possible, because the German movies probably got pretty problematic in like the 30s and 40s.
That's true. Yeah. I can't remember what happened then, but something did. I did read that I thought was kind of funny was the movie was banned in Sweden due to excessive horror, but the ban was finally lifted in 1972. But why I find it funny is I want to meet those guys in 1972 that were like, look, enough's enough. This has been on our daily agenda, or weekly agenda, to go over this. We need to work on getting this movie unbanned. It's like, by that time, all the, Taxi was out. Like, Taxi, yeah. It's like, what the heck? Like, Taxi Driver, it's just like, that's when you decide in 1972? Mm-hmm. 50 years after the movie came out?
Yeah. Well, and what's even funnier to me about that was the reason it was banned was it was too scary, yes. Not that it was like in rampant violation of copyright.
Yeah.
Like that it had been like ordered destroyed. It's like, no, none of that stuff matters. It just we think it'll disturb people.
Yeah. Excessive horror. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What can you do?
God, what would it take to get that today? Could you imagine?
Yeah, no, I could. I mean, it would probably put you in jail. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it would have to be something legit. I mean, I'm down to find out.
Yeah.
Are we making a movie?
I mean,
it sounds like
Actually, I thought we were composing a hip hop score to the Nosferatu.
Yeah, Jesus.
It's like the piggybacking off the success of Hamilton.
Yeah. The cool thing about this, though, is I'm pretty sure later on in the season we're also going to do like the basically the remake of it that came out in the 90s, I believe. Was it in the 90s? It's on the list again. So we'll get to watch this again.
Well, I wonder what the soundtrack will be like.
Hip-hop.
I hope. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.